Okay. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the Microsoft Office 365 Directory Synchronization session. My name is John O'Lock. I'm a program manager with Office 365, and I work on the Directory Sync and Coexistence feature set. I'd also like to introduce Vijayashree. She's one of the developers on the team, and we'll be here after the session as well to make sure we get to all the questions you might have. I know there's a bunch of different types of configs folks expect to get into, so any questions you've got, we'll make sure we get through them. So before I get into this, I just want to get a feel for who all's in the room. Who here is an IT admin, an IT generalist of sorts, someone that's going to be managing the infrastructure for Office 365? Okay, great. What about developers, people that will be working on solutions on top of the Office 365 service? And then consultants, architects, sort of planning ahead. And okay, great. So this session's for you. I'm going to try and make sure we get you armed with all the information you need when you walk out of here. If you have burning questions or clarifications, feel free to throw your hand up. There's mics in the middle, but I'll also try and repeat the question if there is any. And like I said, after the fact, I think the room's free, so feel free to come up and we'll talk through specific issues or anything you want to get to know about. So in terms of this session, two main topics. The first one is, what is Directory Sync? And the second is using Directory Sync. It's really that simple. I do plan to do a quick demo, show you sort of how you get that set up, and we'll do the kitchen show thing where I'll flip to a tenant that already has it done so that we don't spend too much time waiting. So, who do we build directory synchronization for? Well, first of all, it's for all of you. It's for our customers. It's for the IT admins to make your life simpler. It's for the end user to give you the power and functionality of Office 365. Any customer that subscribes to the enterprise subscription plan for Office 365 can use directory synchronization. And really, it's designed to support our smallest customers who might have 5 users through to the largest, which might have 100,000 users and 1 million objects in your Active Directory. Everyone can use directory synchronization. What does Directory Sync do for you? The primary goal is to let you, as the administrator, manage your customers, your users' information in one location, your on-premise Active Directory. The directory synchronization tool will run as an appliance in your intranet and move that information up into the Office 365 service. Really, it's an install and forget experience. Once it's running, it's going silently. You shouldn't have to worry about it. And what we do, though, is we do proactively report issues, meaning if we can't create a user, if there's a duplicate user, any of those types of issues are communicated to you via an email. So no news is good news. What is directory synchronization really doing for your users? It's designed to provide a seamless experience for the users that have some services on-premise, like an Exchange mailbox, and they have Link in the cloud. Other flavors we have 2 flavors of coexistence, There's identity coexistence. Sometimes we call this single sign-on. Sometimes it's federated identity. Sometimes it's federated auth. Think of it as just how a user logs into the service. And the second type is application coexistence. And we'll get into both of these in detail in a second. If this clicker will click. There. So, identity coexistence. Most people think of this as a single sign-on experience. What it really means is your users can use their same intranet credentials to access the Office 365 services, SharePoint, Exchange, Link. All of the information from your on-premise Active Directory, your users, security groups, distribution lists, and contacts are going to be made available in the cloud in Office 365. What does that mean? That means you've got a complete version of your address book for those users that are continuing to use Exchange on-premise, or those that have mailboxes up in Office 365. Something new that we're enabling for Office 365 is we do synchronize security groups now. That's a big piece of what SharePoint ACK-Link functionality allows you to do. I want to enable this security group to access this document library. Well, isn't something we had in the V1, the BPOS service? We support it now. And something of note is directory synchronization is going to create users, groups, and contacts in the service, but you can actually go ahead and create those manually yourself via the Microsoft Online Portal. And I'll show you how that kind of works in a moment in the demo. The other flavor of coexistence I mentioned is what we call application coexistence. And there's two tiers to what you can run. The first is simple, and the second is rich. For simple coexistence, this is what I spoke about earlier. You have a single address book that looks exactly the same whether you have your Exchange mailbox on-premise or in the cloud. That's also the same address book you'll see in SharePoint when you try to resolve a username, and the same address book you'll see in Lync when you're accessing your contacts. With simple coexistence, any user that has a mailbox in the Exchange Online service is going to be able to receive mail at any of the proxy addresses that they have configured in your on-premise Active Directory. There's a caveat to that, and I'll speak to that in a moment. And finally, in Outlook 2010, we provide what we call the Outlook Room Finder feature. It's the bar on the right-hand side while the user is trying to schedule a meeting. By using directory synchronization, we actually move the correct set of metadata across from your on-premise Exchange into the service, so conference rooms work as conference rooms. You can schedule them. The second tier, or the more complete set, is what we call rich coexistence. Now, what this really does is supports what we call hybrid deployments, meaning you're going to have some set of users with some set of services in your intranet and other users with other services in the cloud. So you could have, for example, 50% of your company using Exchange on-premise and the other half in the cloud. Some of the more common scenarios for why customers want this is something like a stage migration or a pilot. I want to start using Office 365. I'm going to start with 5 mailboxes, then my IT department, or maybe a satellite office. Using directory synchronization in rich coexistence mode means that you can support this. And in some cases, customers can't move all your data up into the cloud, whether it be for business reasons, legal reasons, or geopolitical reasons. Again, rich coexistence is going to allow you to keep some users or mailboxes on-premise while others move into the cloud. And with rich coexistence, you get all FreeBusy information moving back and forth between users. So people with Exchange Online mailboxes are able to see FreeBusy for users that continue to have Exchange on-premise. Did I see a hand? Yep. That's a great question. Yeah, so basically, can I edit a user that's been synchronized via the online portal? And the answer is no. So directory synchronizations, in principle, is everything that's created by directory synchronization is owned on-premise. So if you wanted to modify someone's display name, for example, you would do that in your on-premise Active Directory, and then directory sync would move that change up into the cloud. Did that answer the question? Okay. And finally, rich coexistence also allows you to have cross-premise services, meaning I can have my Exchange mailbox on-premise. My company didn't have Lync before. I can now adopt Lync and allow my users to have Lync online services. And so we allow this integration between your mailbox and voicemail, for example. Another feature that a lot of customers want is, my mailbox is on-prem, but I want to archive to a mailbox in the cloud. That's supported with rich coexistence. And finally, some of the Outlook features we're very familiar with: safe senders, block senders. All that information is synchronized up into the cloud, again, with the directory synchronization tool. Switching gears a little bit, when should you think about using directory synchronization? First of all, I want to stress, directory synchronization is a long-term commitment. I know that sounds scary, but basically what that means is you should expect to set it up and leave it running. It's silent, like I said before. It's an install and forget experience. But really, directory synchronization just continue to run. That's how you keep your address book up to date. When you add new users and employees, that's how that information gets up there. When employees retire or leave the company, that's how that information is removed. A couple common scenarios that customers have asked about, I've summarized here just to help make this more concrete. So a lot of people say, well, I just really want to initially bulk provision my users. I just want to get them up into the service, and then I don't need it after that. Directory synchronization isn't really designed for that. And the reason for why we don't really want it to be used as an onboarding tool, I'll get to in a moment. So don't consider directory synchronization in that case. A big win feature for us is identity federation in Office 365. Your users can now sign in using the same credentials as they do for your intranet. In that case, you should absolutely consider using directory synchronization. That's how your users are going to be provisioned into the cloud and then facilitate that federated identity. And both long-term and partial adoption of Office 365 is also absolutely a scenario for directory synchronization. Again, you might be piloting, or you might actually expect to be in a long-term state where users have mailboxes both in the cloud and on-premise. Both of those scenarios, directory synchronization is how you're going to enable that configuration. There's a couple types of requirements for directory synchronization. This is all documented on the web, but I want to talk through them here. The first is the host OS. So you're going to install directory synchronization on-premise. We require a 32-bit OS. I'll talk about 64-bit OSs in a moment. So with 32-bit OS, that means Server 2003 SP2, or any flavor of 08 that's 32-bit. And there's a caveat there where that OS cannot be a domain controller. That's just that's a prerequisite check that we do for you, so I'll let you know this is not a supported host OS, but something just to keep in mind. The second type of requirement is the Active Directory forest that we're synchronizing the data from. I mean, long story short, every level of forest functionality is supported. However, if you're running 2008 R2 and you have the recycle bin feature enabled, there is a known compatibility issue between the directory synchronization tool and that. And I have a slide later on about that, so I can give you a little bit more detail, but that's just something to note. If you don't have recycle bin, there's no problem at all with 2008 R2. And the third set of requirements, again, if you want to enable that rich coexistence feature set, you have to have Exchange 2010 SP1 client access server deployed on-premise. It is a free SKU, and we need that because it installs the schema extensions on your Active Directory on-premise that we'll write information back to facilitate that experience. I'm going to switch gears here and do a quick demo. What I will be showing you is, yep. Yeah, you can download the CAS, the client access server. You don't have to, it's not a purchase. Was that just the, okay. Yeah, it's downloadable. I think you can find it on TechNet. I can't remember where the launch point is, but it's something you can find. Yes? So in what context?
If you have Exchange 2007, can I coexist with cloud, or am I dead?
So there's a couple parts to that answer. The first one is if you want to go wholly up into migrate all your mailboxes up to Office 365, that's not a problem. It's only going to be when you want that rich coexistence, so half of my users are on-premise and half are in cloud, that the Exchange 2010 CAS server is a requirement. So it really depends on what scenario you want to enable for your users. So if you sign up for the public beta, it's available right now. The booth, you can do it there. You can do it from home. The first thing you'll want to do to set up directory synchronization is log into the portal. So I have a fresh tenant set up. And what I'm going to walk through here is how you would start the whole directory synchronization installation process so that it can start running. Everything's on the screen, right? Okay, good. So the first thing I want to call out is it's really important. When you signed up for Office 365, they asked you for an email address. That email address shows up here, this email. That's where we send all of the errors. So make sure that that's a valid email that's being monitored. Sometimes people just kind of put in an email address and forget about it, but that's how we communicate with you, whether it be for service-related issues, any security type things, or in our case, directory synchronization sends mails about errors to that email address. Something else that's really important for folks in the room, you'll want to set up your domains. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a sec, but basically, we need to know about the domains in your Active Directory. The reason why is as we do synchronization, we do certain computations and processing. So you access this, and you can add a domain. I don't have any offhand that I can add, but you just simply register these, and there's a quick verification, so we know that the domain you gave us, you legitimately own. So this is a brand new tenant. There's basically nothing set up. If you want to come in and start directory synchronization, you click on Setup. There's some documentation on how to think about directory synchronization. It's a rehash of what we just talked about here. Verify domains, like we just talked about. Make sure your domains are in the system so those computations will succeed. The next step is you'll want to activate Active Directory synchronization. This tells us that you intend to use directory sync so that we don't block you. Yes?
Okay. Is using a local AD
Like a contoso.local. Is that what you mean by local AD?
yeah, well, if you use like .local for your
Right.
PLP extension.
Yes, no, great question. So the question was, can you use something like contoso.local, just an internal domain name? Unfortunately, with Office 365, you can't. The main reason why is, from the services standpoint, we need to know that you actually own that domain. And we have no way to verify with you that the contoso.local, or whatever that domain name happens to be, is unique and owned by you. So it does need to be contoso.com or something like that, which has public ownership. Did that answer the question there?
Yes.
Okay. So you click on the Activate button, and it's going to ask you, do you want to activate Active Directory? Important. The ability to deactivate Active Directory synchronization is currently not available. Get back to what the implications of that are. Right now, you kind of have to click yes. I know, just letting you know that it's there. So you click yes, you've now activated. So it's a quick change. The next step is you're going to download the actual the directory synchronization tool. I'm just going to save it to my desktop here and do that. So once that's downloaded, we'll run it. All right. So it's a single exe, nothing too fancy. And then you kick that off, run. So there's two phases to setting up directory synchronization tool. The first is an actual installation. We're going to install the components we need. The second step is configuring the actual directory synchronization tool to run. And that's after that, it just runs by itself. Just standard welcome screen, nothing too fancy. You kind of, again, have to accept the software license terms. Again, this is a 32-bit OS, so just the default is program files. And now it's going to lay down a couple prerequisite items. It takes about 10 minutes because it's a very small VM that I'm running this on. We'll come back to that in a moment. All right. So while that's doing an install, a bit deeper into how directory synchronization actually works and what the overall architecture looks like. In the simplest terms, you have the customer network, your intranet, and then we have the Office 365 data center. The far left Active Directory triangle is your Active Directory forest. Note, directory synchronization only synchronizes from a single Active Directory forest right now. The right now part's the caveat. Your Active Directory is on-premise. You're going to install the directory synchronization tool. That's the second orange box there, and that's what we're doing right now. That's really all that's needed to facilitate directory synchronization. Now, if you want to do identity federation, all those things, you'll be deploying an ADFS farm and all those different components. That's not required for directory sync. All you need is that one client. What the directory synchronization tool does, it's going to talk to, just generically speaking, an Office 365 set of front ends. It's all over web services. So it's important to make sure that that machine you install the directory sync client on has outbound access. Whoops. Our front ends do a bunch of computation and then do two subsequent things. First one, we're going to create users in the Microsoft Online ID service. This is an enterprise-ready version of what people think of as Windows Live ID. It looks exactly the same to the end user. It's just a completely segregated instance of it. The front ends are also going to chew on that data for a bit and put it into the Office 365 directory. This is our central repository of all customer and user information. It's fully segregated and partitioned for tenant, but that's our directory store. And then depending on what you've signed up for, the different subscriptions you have, that information will flow into Exchange, Lync, SharePoint, and the Office subscription service. All this is completely transparent to you if that data just moves down as appropriate. In certain situations, you can actually create contacts, create distribution lists within the Exchange service. That information will flow back into the Office 365 directory. This is just sort of a generic one-way diagram. What you'll see in a moment, once this is done, the installation part, for configuration, we ask you for enterprise admin credentials. So that can be scary. We don't cache this. We only use it at configuration time to create an account that we need in order to pull the Active Directory for us for changes. If you enable that rich coexistence feature set, we're also going to set permissions, write permissions to 6 attributes, which I have in a table in a second, because that's what we have to push back on-premise in order to facilitate that, that on-premise and cloud coexistence. We also ask you for an account with global administrator privileges. We need that because we're going to push information up into your tenancy in Office 365, and that's the level of permission required to create users, modify users, and ultimately even delete if someone leaves the company and they fall out of your AD. We do, again, sync all users, contacts, and groups, both distribution lists and security groups, from your single AD forest. We query the AD DirSync control for that information. Again, nothing needs to be done by you, but just more information. And we do filter out some well-known objects. So for example, when you install Exchange 2010 SP1 CAS, certain accounts are created. We know that that's not interesting for you in the cloud, so we drop those out. There's also some attribute patterns we look for, curly brace, underscore, that indicates to us these are not necessary, they're not legitimate users, so we don't bring those up to the cloud either. But that's the only filtering we do. And rule of thumb, we sync about every 3 hours. So you're getting about 8 sync cycles in a day. Since we're talking about sync, at the tail end of configuring the directory synchronization tool, we do a first run. That's a full sync, meaning we're pushing all the information that we get from the Active Directory up into the Office 365 service. Users are created, security groups are populated, everything is pushed into the cloud. Every run after that is effectively a delta run, meaning I'm going to check for changes since the last time I did a sync and push that information up into Office 365. The time required to complete one of these runs is completely dependent on how your AD looks. For example, if you have 100 users in an Active Directory, that's going to be a very different level of complexity, computation time, and work required than if you had 25 users and 75 security groups that are all nested within one another. And again, there isn't really anything you need to do at all. That's just some information to let you know that it may take a little bit of time for your users to start showing up. The bigger your Active Directory, the longer it's going to take to do that initial run. As I mentioned before, it runs on a 32-bit OS. Part of what the installation process is doing right now is it's laying down SQL Server 2008 R2 Express. That's the default database engine we use. Customers that are larger, so you have about 50,000 or more objects in your Active Directory, should consider going to SQL Server 2005 or 2008, a full-blown SQL. And that's primarily because SQL Express has that 10 gigabit database size limit. So the data being stored inside SQL will be significantly larger if your Active Directory is more complex. We do use some Microsoft Online ID components to, again, authenticate your directory synchronization appliance with the Office 365 service. And our client's available in 23 languages, the same languages that we offer the service in. On the server side of the diagram, so what we said was the Office 365 data center, what we do is we synchronize objects in batches. These are effectively, we've chunked out the amount of information that has to be sent up and passed it up this way. Users are provisioned into the Microsoft Online ID service so they can log in. And ultimately, all objects are provisioned into that Office 365 directory. And again, depending on what you've signed up for and what services you've lit up, the information will flow into any subset of those services. Yes?
We just started this with Office 365 and we ran into 10,000 object limitations. We had to have increased. Is that standard?
It's standard. So that's perfect timing because the next slide was sync object limits. So like you called out, by default, all customers are subject to a 10,000 object limit. You get the error email basically, right, where it said you've exceeded your quota, please contact support for an increase. The process is you contact support, open the service request saying I need an increase, and we'll actually, if you don't already have the count, provide you with a means to give us the exact information, the total number of objects you have, total number of users, and total number of groups, and then we're able to grant that increase. The thing to note, and the reason why we have this in place, Larger customers, which have more than 20,000 user objects, not licensed users, but user objects in their Active Directory, need to sign up for a special subscription. In that case, if you're at that size, you're probably already working with an account manager or someone from Microsoft to help you plan the deployment. If not, when you call support, we'll get you in touch with one. But the net is work with your MS account rep if you're in that situation. There's certain variants in terms of when SharePoint Online will light up for you for customers with more than 20,000 total users. As part of processing on the server, we validate some attributes. And like I mentioned earlier, we process them in batches and we do them on the fly. We follow a first-in-wins conflict resolution scheme, meaning that if there's two objects for some reason they're duplicating data, the first object will provision successfully. The second object is going to get an error, again, via email to the technical notification email. Yes?
How do you identify the second object?
Definitely. So using user principal name as an example attribute, if joe@contoso.com was in batch 1, and then another object had the same UPN in the second batch, it's chronological order. So the first object we saw with joe@contoso.com got provisioned properly. And then at a later time that second one came through, that's how we identify the second.
No, I'm asking how do I identify the second object because the error message that comes back is non-specific.
So what the email should say is it should have a column which provides you with a unique identifier of the object GUID. That's how we can uniquely identify that object within your Active Directory using the actual object GUID value of the user object or distribution group or whatever object is causing the issue. Is that?
I think so. How do I? Can you? So that's the object GUID
Yep.
of the second object that's having a problem.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Two primary types of attribute validation we do. First one is proxy addresses. So earlier on I said you want to make sure you register your domains with Office 365. Because when we process users, for example, we look through the proxy address list. If any of those SMTP addresses are using a domain that hasn't been verified with your company, we'll strip them out on the fly. That's not changing your on-premise ID, that's removing it from the user object in the cloud. So that means that user can no longer receive email at that email address. So make sure you register those domains before you're actually running directory synchronization. And from a service standpoint, the reason we do that is we don't want people to add these proxy addresses and us blindly process them and allow mail to be sent to the wrong people. Another type of validation we do is of the user principal names, the UPN. Again, if it uses a domain that hasn't been registered with your company, we'll actually generate one for you. We'll generate it using the mail nickname attribute, @ and then your domain .onmicrosoft.com. That's a value that's defined when you first register. So you choose domain. So you would choose my company or whatever have you. Some of the most common issues we see with attribute values, I've put up here just as a quick primer. For user principal names, for example, you can't have a dot immediately preceding the @ sign. So you can have jono.luck@microsoft.com, but you can't have jono.luck. at microsoft.com. There's a length restriction. We can't have a user principal name that's longer than 113 characters. You break it down, you can't have the username portion longer than 64, and you can't have the domain name longer than 48, and we stick the @ in the middle for 113 characters. There's a slew of characters we can't support in there. That's the list. We see a lot of ampersands and exclamation marks in these in the UPN values, so that's important to note. And you can't have duplicate user principal names. When we do the directory synchronization process and we provision users into Microsoft Online ID, their sign-in name is the user principal name. So clearly you can't have two users with the same user principal name. SAM account name has some similar restrictions. Can't contain certain objects, can't be more than 20 characters, can't be empty. And proxy addresses, already covered that. Can't have an SMTP address that uses a domain you haven't registered. And you can't have duplicate proxy addresses, but that's true of Exchange anyways. Oh, I'm sorry. And at the bottom, again, all errors are proactively reported to you by email. So you don't have to worry. We'll tell you exactly when there's a problem. For rich coexistence, first of all, if you don't have rich coexistence turned on, we will never modify your on-premise AD. It's a read-only situation as far as we're concerned. If you do enable rich coexistence, however, we'll modify up to 6 attributes on users and contacts. And the attributes that we modify are for a couple different features. We talked about this before. So there's safe senders, block senders, and safe recipients. We'll push that information back on-premise for you if it's from a user that has a mailbox in the cloud. Similarly, we talked about Cloud Archive. We'll update the MS Exchange archive status attribute. What we do as part of provisioning mailboxes into the cloud is we actually give it a unique address. And we add that to the proxy address list for the users. So that down the line, if you want to bring one of those mailboxes back down, a user has moved departments and that department can't be in the cloud anymore, or the user's leaving, and so you just want to pull it down and archive it, that information is required. So automatically taken care of by rich coexistence is just something we add to the proxy addresses. And finally, one that we're seeing a lot of, people want to have Exchange mailboxes on-premise. They've never used Link before. You can use Link online to give you that IM and presence information. We leverage this particular setting here to let you know that you have voicemail. So in Link, it'll show you how many voicemails you have. It's associated with the user. This attributes how we actually connect those two things together. So wanted to talk a bit about how we actually know when an object is an object. We use what we call a source anchor. It's a value we compute based on the object GUID of an object in the on-premise Active Directory. And we actually stamp every object we create via directory sync with this value. Earlier on, I said you can go ahead and create users, groups, and distribution lists, whatnot, in the Office 365 service before you ever run directory synchronization. What that means then is if you're in a piloting state, I've created 5 users with mailboxes, which actually represent 5 real users on premise. Well, there may be overlap in this case. So what we do as part of the synchronization process is we try to map the 2 objects together. We try our best to look for the source anchor. Actually, I should go to the next slide. When we're synchronizing, that's the first thing we check. Is there any object that's already in the service that has this source anchor value? If there is, then that's the object that was sunk before. Process the change there. If you went and created a user, for example, before you run directory sync for the first time, they won't have that source anchor value because you created the user manually. What we do then is we fall back and use the SMTP addresses to try to match users next. Because generally speaking, a user will always have the same email address, right? If we're able to match on the SMTP address, we consider them matched, and we stamp that source anchor value on the object in the cloud. And from there on out, it's exactly the same as if directory synchronization had done this in the first place. Something to note, as part of this match, we're going to overwrite whatever was some of the attributes that are in the Office 365 service. So if I'm John O'Luck in the cloud, but Jonathan Luck on premise, but my email address is matched, you'll suddenly see that user you created before gets whatever's on premise. So there's suddenly Jonathan Luck now. And I've only been talking about users because we only support matching on users. Because it's that important, I'm saying one more time. All errors are reported by email, so make sure the technical notification contact is correct, and that's a monitored mailbox. And anytime you get an error, oh, the gentleman's gone, but anytime you get an error like what he saw, there's a duplicate value, an invalid value, one of the characters there, you have to actually make those changes on premise. Again, because directory synchronization is going to use that on-premise AD as the authoritative source for information. Thinking about directory synchronization, there's 3 main questions you want to make sure you ask before you start doing what we just did. The first one is, do you plan to enable identity federation? If you do, make sure you register your domains with the Office 365 service, and make sure you activate federation. Do you plan to enable rich coexistence? We just talked about this. If you do, make sure you have the Exchange 2010 SP1 CAS server deployed on-premise, as well as attributes are available for us to write to. In fact, if you don't have the SP1 CAS server deployed, you're not able to enable rich coexistence. It's grayed out, so you'll know whether or not it was set up correctly. And finally, this is kind of a meta one. Is your Active Directory ready? So we talked about duplicate proxy values, invalid characters in UPN. We're trying our best to get this out to you so you can catch these things before you start running directory sync. There's 2 main tools we're providing our customers with, and both of them are able to cover what we talked about before. The first is the deployment guide from Microsoft Online. It's more comprehensive than just directory synchronization. So for the folks that are planning deployments, the IT admins, I would strongly recommend going out and reading through that if you haven't already. It gives you a lot of great background on the service, the constraints, and actually some of the rationalizations for why some of those exist. The second thing that will be coming out shortly is the Office 365 BPA, the Best Practice Analyzer. It's a tool that you can run on-premise. It'll interrogate your Active Directory and try and proactively tell you all the issues that exist. So those UPN characters that are invalid, duplicate values, length constraints, it'll analyze your data and give you an output report saying here are the users that have invalid data, duplicated data, domains that weren't registered, so that you can address those things before you start directory synchronization and have to deal with it one at a time. Couple things that come up a lot when talking with customers, want to just sort of get these out there. Filtering. So I mentioned earlier, we implicitly do some filtering so we don't bring up service accounts and whatnot. Customization of filters is not supported. Some folks may know how to do this using the underlying, the engine and whatnot. We don't support it because automatic scoping out. So in the case where I might say I only want to synchronize as one OU, which is fine in and of itself. But if there's a disconnect between the folks that are managing directory sync and the folks that are onboarding and offboarding users, you could very easily get a user moved out of that OU, in which case it looks like they were deleted, and we're just going to happily process that and delete their mailbox in the cloud. So we're trying to prevent badness by not supporting filtering right now. And also, how many folks in here are BPOS V1 customers? So you're already on the BPOS service. Okay, and you're probably running directory sync right now? Okay, you may know about the filter file that we offer. It's an XML file, yeah, drop it. We don't support that anymore. Similar to the above, we don't want to allow customers to get into a state where something might fall off the synchronization radar and we start deprovisioning mailboxes. That's the scariest one for us. Highly available directory sync. So the directory sync tool itself is not configurable for high availability. But there's something important to call out here. If your directory sync tool is down, your GAL will go, and Exchange Online will go stale. Meaning I haven't removed users that got removed on my on-premise AD, or I haven't added users that just got added. Things like identity federation will continue to function. That's a completely independent system. That's why, although we're not set up for high availability, the impact on your business should be relatively small. And again, we actually proactively check how, which tenants, which customers have not run a synchronization cycle in 2 days. If we notice this, we'll email you and say, hey, you know what? We haven't seen a sync in 2 days. You're supposed to be running every 3 hours. Something's definitely off. So we try to help out there where possible as well. Because at the very least, the DirSync client calls home once every 3 or so hours. And scale for the actual tool. Microsoft uses directory sync. The exact tool that we're giving our customers, we use ourselves. We have about 1 million objects, 150,000 users, so it does scale. And I mentioned this before. Customers with more than 50,000 or so objects in your Active Directory should use full SQL. Again, that's because the Express engine has a 10 gigabyte database limit, and you don't want to hit that limit while you're doing your synchronization because you'll have to start over. There is no migrate from Express into full SQL. If you do that, we have a full set of PowerShell commandlets that allow you to set up directory synchronization using the full SQL server instead of the default SQL Express. So, 64-bit directory synchronization is coming. I actually have a question. This is selfish for me. Who in the room, if they could, would not run a 32-bit directory synchronization client? And then kind of the converse. Does anyone in the room have a restriction so they can only run a 32-bit client? Oh, good, okay. We're definitely looking to do this. It'll be roughly during the summer. In terms of functionality, the core functionality is exactly the same. That's the key thing here. The 64-bit version will be installable in 64-bit, and it provides support for Windows 2008 R2 ADs that have recycle bin enabled. Yes? I'm sorry? Will it run on core? I don't think so. I can follow up on that for you. Yeah, I don't know if there's actually any restriction. Do you, Vijayashree? Maybe it does. I'll double check. And just real quick, for folks in the room, sorry, we mentioned this earlier, recycle bin reanimation. Effectively, if you are running this right now with a 32-bit version of directory synchronization, and you have reanimated objects and users from the recycle bin, the effect is that the users won't have their memberships recreated. So if I was a member of certain security groups and I was deleted as a user and then reanimated, I won't be put back into those security groups in the Office 365 service. It's actually a compatibility issue with our underlying sync engine, and that's why we definitely want to get the 64-bit client out there. So if that's something you're seeing, let us know. There's ways to fix that up. But the most comprehensive way for us is clearly to release 64-bit. Yes?
Is there any strategy to integrate the Office 365 with existing management installation?
We don't have sort of a pointed solution allowing someone to just plug in. Are you thinking like plug in an MA to an existing FIM installation, basically? Yeah, we don't really have that on our roadmap for what we're planning to support. But that said, we do have a scenario which is around multi-forest, which would entail sort of doing something like that, right? If you have an existing FIM installation, we'll provide you an MA plus a bunch of schema and whatnot for the different attribute flows. So if there's a business a reason why you need to be using an existing FIM, that's something we should actually talk about. It'd be interesting to know. By default, the directory synchronization client's free, right? You don't have to pay for it. So we should figure out there. So yes?
Since it doesn't support domain controllers, that means SBS installation would be unable to use this tool?
Yeah, that was something that came up at the MVP Summit as well. That is one of the downsides of not being able to be installed in a DC. How many folks in the room are from a company or work for and consult with companies that have multiple Active Directory forests containing users, contacts, and groups? Okay, so fact, a lot of customers have that, as this is evidence of. Another fact is we don't support that right now. The directory synchronization tool that we're releasing at general availability can only sync from a single AD forest. For folks that are on BPOS v1, I know that we had recommended doing some type of aggregation of your AD forests and then running directory synchronization from that. So there's a couple features in Office 365 where that becomes a little bit more complex. So what we're doing is around general availability, we're going to be providing prescriptive guidance on how existing customers of the BPOS v1 service can get from your BPOS v1 deployment state into an Office 365 deployment state. And then if you're in specific configurations, you can enable identity federation, rich coexistence, so on and so forth. The white paper will sort of say, here is the topology configuration that we support. We know it works. It's a testing thing, right? We want to make sure we validated all the corner cases. And so that's how we'll work with the existing customers to get you into a state where you're able to use Office 365 and unlock those new features. V1 customers that are outside of that supported state or new Office 365 customers that want to be synchronizing from multiple AD forests, you need to wait until 2012. We're going to be providing a comprehensive multi-forest solution. So everything from how ADFS needs to be configured, how sync needs to run, and we're also going to provide, there's a new feature coming soon to basically a recycle bin. So it's a family of features that we're bringing and providing customers to make sure that we don't get you into a bad state. Couple real quick gotchas. So synchronized objects are mastered on-premise, which means to fix a problem, like I said before, you make that change on-premise, and it synchronizes to the cloud. This has started to make a little bit of noise, I think, on the forums, and I've heard a couple times here. Stopping directory synchronization. So first of all, like I said, long-term commitment, right? You should think about that as running in the background, never have to touch it again. To clarify, though, what the case is, you can't deactivate directory synchronization. When we were activating it in the first place, it said important, make sure you can't deactivate. That's what this speaks to. You can, however, although I don't recommend it and don't know necessarily what would be the driving reason, you can turn off your directory synchronization machine. That actual OS itself, you can shut that down. But then you're going to start seeing gal freshness issues and anything else associated with new users not making it up into the cloud, users that are no longer with the company not being deleted, memberships for groups and all that. So that's just to clarify a bit. Why does that matter? Well, you can't delete users that have been dir synced up into Office 365 directly from that portal site that we were just on earlier. You have to remove it from your on-premise Active Directory to have it removed in the cloud. Now, the key thing here, right, when we synchronize all these users, not all of them are licensed. Some subset will be licensed. Those are the guys that get Exchange, or the gals that get Exchange, or SharePoint. So in this case, we usually think of the life cycle as employees are added to the Active Directory on-premise, employees are removed from the Active Directory, and directory sync is moving that information up accordingly. Now, the thing that may bite some people, why does it matter that you can't delete users directly from the Microsoft Online portal? Because if you want to remove a domain from your tenant, and that was that screen I showed you where you can add a new domain, well, the converse is to remove it. You can't deregister a domain from Office 365 until all the users that have user principal names, proxy addresses, and other attributes that are using that domain are removed. And so we actually do a validation. When you select that radio button for the domain, you say remove domain, we do a quick check. Do any user objects, contacts, distribution lists, any of those use this domain? If so, you can't remove that domain. We can help you with this. On the back end, we have a way to deal with it. If this is coming up a lot in the context of piloting. I'm going to create a beta tenant, try some stuff out. OK, I'm ready to go to my real tenant now. I need to bring my domain over. Contact support. We actually, Vijay and I, take care of that. We have a back-end process to help you out. But right now, at least, up till just shortly after general availability, that functionality is not supported. Switch back to directory sync real quick, just to finish this off. So this has been running. It's finished the installation. Complete. Again, there's two phases, laying down the bits and binaries and then configuring the actual tool. So this is the installation piece that's complete. Next, I'm going to kick off the configuration piece. There we are. Standard welcome screen. So this is where it asks you for that global administrator account. JLAC test at. That's just a global admin account. It's going to do a quick validation for you. Some common issues we see here, if there's proxy issues, it can't reach out to the service, it'll come back and let you know. It'll validate username and password on the fly, so it'll also return an error message directly in the dialog box there, so that you don't get into a bad situation later. This is where I talked about earlier needing enterprise administrator credentials. Again, it's not stored. It's used on the fly to create that account that we need in order to do the synchronization work. So why not give it domain admin? And again, I said earlier, if that rich coexistence feature set, you want that, you have to have Exchange 2010 SP1 CAS on-premise. In this particular test topology, I don't have it deployed. And so you can see it's not an option for me. If you had it deployed, the scheme extensions exist. You have the option to check that checkbox. And then now it's going to go and actually configure the directory sync client. I'm not going to wait for it to finish its sync cycle. I'm going to switch over, actually, and go to a pre-populated tenant. So, sign in. I'm kind of cheating here. This is the tenant that we were just configuring directory synchronization for. So the couple things I just want to show here are what it looks like after directory synchronization has been run. Again, we deal primarily with users and security groups. So I think this is my West Wing tenant. It is. So you can see here there's two types of objects. Aaron Sorkin has a little sync symbol. That means that directory sync created this object. Down here, one version of John O'Luck has the MSN style icon. That means that you created that object directly in the Microsoft Online portal. And why that actually makes a difference, if I click on the one that was created in the portal directly, I can go, and I click Properties, I can go ahead and modify things. Right? This is all doable. Again, because directory synchronization didn't create it, it's fully administered in the cloud. If I go to a user that was created, like here, Aaron Sorkin, and do the same thing, again, directory synchronization owns this object. It's mastered on-premise. So you'd actually have to go to the on-premise Active Directory, make that change to change it to something else, and sync that up. If I had more time, I'd actually go and do that, but I want to show you a couple other things as well. Same thing for security groups. Oops, yes. With security groups, the same indicator. The sync symbol means directory sync created it, and the MSN style icon means that was created directly in the cloud. And that's Yeah, that's it. At the end of configuration here, sorry for jumping around on you, you have the option to go ahead and start that full sync, that first sync again. Yes? If you create a group in MSN? Oh, sorry. So I might have been a little bit confusing there. There's actually no tie-in with the MSN service at all. That was just an icon, a graphic that we use. So yeah, if you create a group in MSN, though, you can't. Oh, in Office 365, okay. Yes, you can do that. So you're saying, can I, with this security group, add someone that was synced up? Absolutely. We can actually just do it right now. So Aaron Sorkin was synced up, right? And so is Abigail Bartlett. And so that's all it's done there. And so I mentioned earlier, Exchange has some administrative UI as well, where you can go ahead and create contacts directly in Exchange as well as distribution lists. That data will also flow into this central console for you. So you'll see the whole set, things that were directory synced, things that you created directly here, and things that were created in Exchange. And which objects you can edit and the matrix there is a little bit different depending on where it's created. But you have a central administrative experience. And so I'm just going to kick this off, but there's nothing too fancy. So it's basically saying, no, here's how you can go and check to make sure directory synchronization is working properly. And really, that's it. That install process is all you need to do to get directory synchronization up and running. Yes?
If your directory sync server fails, you just reinstall it.
That's a great question. So the question was, if your directory synchronization client fails, the VM was wiped or something happened to it, can you just reinstall the client from scratch? Absolutely. Caveat there again, because the amount of time it takes to do that first sync again, right, once you've reinstalled is going to be significantly longer for bigger companies. But yeah, the whole system is designed using the identity and the mapping piece, right, for you to just go ahead and install the new one and then just kick it off. All right. So, just coming back to here, that's actually it for the session. I wanted to call out 2 other sessions that would be possibly interesting. Tomorrow, Ross and I are presenting the Using Active Directory with Microsoft Office 365. It's going to talk about the Identity Federation scenario in a whole end-to-end, DirSync, and how that populates Office 365, and how you'll configure ADFS. So if that's a scenario you're looking to light up, that's definitely something to think about. And we're also doing a Q&A, sort of a smaller group discussion, which is, I believe it's tomorrow morning. I'll have to double check the time. Yeah. And again, Ross, Vijay, and I will be there for that. So we can dive into some of the scenarios if they're more Identity Federation focused. And then there's the Office 365 booth all the way downstairs. We're there today, tomorrow. So feel free to drop by to find out more about the various services. This is just, in case anyone was interested, a very long list of the features, but we've basically covered everything anyways. And I believe the deck is available after the presentation, so feel free to do that. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take questions or whatnot. Yes? Yes, so the question was what happens with disabling users. So if you're on your on-premise Active Directory and you basically check the box, right, your account is disabled, that information does actually flow up to Office 365. We synchronize a bunch of the information there. What's interesting, though, in Office 365, the disable-enable model is a little bit different than the way Active Directory thinks. You give a user a license. If I want you to have an Exchange mailbox, I give you a license for Exchange. If I want you to use SharePoint, I give you a license to use SharePoint. So the enablement piece there doesn't directly control how the Office 365 services work. And in fact, the UI that we were kind of going through earlier, where I changed my name from Jono to Jonathan, that same admin experience is how you give and take away licenses. So in the context of Identity Federation, you definitely want to control your logon, enable, disable on-premise. And then how that translates and flows up into mailbox disabling, that's managed through the Office portal that we were just on. Yes?
Sort of a continuation of that, when you disable someone in Active Directory, as an end user, what actually happens to my access to Office 365?
That's a great question. So when you disable on-prem, and then that information flows to the cloud, nothing by default happens except with SharePoint. What SharePoint does, let's say, it's me, right? keep doing this. That scared me. So if I'm a user of SharePoint, I have a license, I'm able to access my site collections and do everything. You've gone and you've disabled my access on-premise on the Active Directory. That attribute value flows up to the cloud. SharePoint checks that you have a license and that you are logon enabled to give you access to a site collection. That's the only service that does this. Exchange and Link is like I said before, you have to take away a license. But by disabling your logon for a user, they're no longer able to access SharePoint even though they have a license. That's the only real sort of immediate effect of disabling someone on premise.
I'll still be able to access my Exchange.
Now, that said, yes, if you're not using ADFS. If you use ADFS for identity federation, right, your login. Yes, exactly. But that's the primary implication of disabling someone on premise. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a completely valid. So let's do it. Let me just actually give myself a license here to show you. So right now, if you take a look, the E3 plan, where this is Exchange, SharePoint Online, I can just go ahead, like you said, from an HR process, disable them on-premise, and also just go ahead and uncheck. And what that actually does, though, it's a little bit scary. If you take away Exchange, it'll deprovision a mailbox, right? So there are some very deep implications around taking away a license, but that's how you could block them from accessing resources. Gone. So that's definitely something that you don't want to take that lightly in this case, right? Taking away SharePoint license, not as bad, because again, that's an access control. But for Link and Exchange, where there's actually data in the service, it's data loss. You're taking away their mailbox. Yeah. Yep. You know, I'm pretty sure that there is. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, because you can assign licenses using PowerShell, so there must be a remove. Oh, there isn't? There's your answer. Not yet. Yeah, you can kick off the stir sync using the start coexistence sync on your client machine.
What's the most automated way to disable his access? Something.
Yes. Yeah. The question was, do we sync up the admin SD records? And I don't believe we do, because that would be kind of scary. I'm looking, Vijay. We don't, right? No. Other questions? All right. Well, we're both going to be here. I don't think anyone's in the room after, so if you have any other questions or specifics you want to talk about, come on up. Otherwise, thank you.